Hi preschoolers, I've got a new book to read to you guys today as part of our unit on things that grow. And our new book is one of my favorite books ever, and it's called Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey. Make Way for Ducklings. Just by looking at the front cover and knowing that the title is called Make Way for Ducklings, turn and talk to whoever you're with about what you think might happen in the story or what you think it's going to be about. Look at that picture. All right, let's find out. Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. Mallard. Mallard is another word for duck. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there might be foxes or turtles. So they flew on and on. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further. Boston is another city in America, kind of like Chicago. There was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. Does anybody know what the word island means? An island is a body of land that's surrounded by water on all sides. You see how this island is surrounded by water all the way around. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. The next morning, they fished for their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. Look at that. They go head first in the water looking for food. Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. Good morning, quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts into the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. Is that a real bird? No, this is a kind of boat with a swan on the back, so that man is driving the boat with the pretend swan. But those Mallards think it's a real big bird. I like this place, said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank and waddled along. Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There are no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts. What could be better? Good, said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard had found a place that suited her. But... Look out! Squawked Mrs. Mallard, all of a dither. You'll get run over. And when she got her breath, she added, This is no place for babies, with all those horrid things rushing about. We'll have to look somewhere else. It looks like they were scared by a bike. Ooh. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. Hope they find someplace soon. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Ducks definitely need water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. This is better, quacked Mr. Mallard. That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden. Yes, said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. That looks like just the right place to hatch ducklings. Hatch ducklings. The word hatch, what do you think that means? So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water and settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. Molt. I wonder what that word means. All their old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly again until the new ones grew in. So when ducks molt, they lose their old feathers and then they grow some new ones. Can you think of any other animals that maybe lose their skin to grow new skin? Maybe lose some other like fur or feathers to grow new fur or feathers? But of course they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the riverbank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael fed them peanuts, and after that, the mallards called on Michael every day. His name's Michael, the police officer, just like I have 2 Michaels in my class. After Mrs. Mallard had laid 8 eggs in the nest, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 eggs. She couldn't go to visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs and make sure they were all there. One day, the ducklings hatched out. There's that word hatch. So hatch means they come out of the egg. They hatch out of the egg. First came Jack, then Cack, and then Lack, then Mack, and Knack, and Whack, and Pack, and Quack. All of their names rhyme. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. It was a great responsibility taking care of so many ducklings, and it kept them very busy. One day, Mr. Mallard decided he'd like to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like, further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings." "Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. Mrs. Mallard seems like a good mommy. She taught them how to swim and dive. Look at her teaching her babies how to swim. She taught them to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, follow me." Before you could wink an eyelash, Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Look at them following their mommy. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. So they're going somewhere else. I wonder where. There they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to the highway. Does anybody know what a highway is? We've talked about highways at school before. What's a highway? A highway is where cars drive very fast. Those ducks better be careful. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road, and honk, honk went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled again. Quack, 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 quack went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack. Whew, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars kept speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. Oh my goodness. They made such a noise that Michael came running, waving his arms and blowing his whistle. I wonder what Michael's doing. He planted himself in the center of the road, raised one hand to stop the traffic, and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. It looks like Michael's helping Mrs. Mallard and her ducklings cross the street. It's a nice thing for him to do. Those policemen are always helping. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way down Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." Clancy said, "Family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car, quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned into Charles Street, with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. They are still walking along. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" And the man who swept the street said, "Well, now, ain't that nice?" And when Mrs. Mallard heard them, she was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked along with an extra swing in her waddle. She was so proud of her little babies following behind her. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so Mrs. Mallard and the Ducklings could march across the street. See them marching? I hope they make it safe. Right on into the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. The policeman smiled and waved goodbye. When they reached the pond and swam across to the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. You see Mr. Mallard? He's on the island waiting for his family. The Ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they follow the swan boats and eat peanuts. And when night falls, they swim to their little island and go to sleep. The end. Did you like this story? What was your favorite part? Turn and talk to whoever you're with about what your favorite part of Make Way for Ducklings was. Bye, friends.